Back in 2023, PSVR2 was having the time of its life. Even though there were some reports of sales being lower than expected, the PlayStation VR community was hyped for the future. And as someone who discovered VR thanks to PSVR, I was also loving every minute of 2023. And on the horizon, we had a game that was about to play a big part in the headset's long-term success, and that was called Firewall Ultra. An Astrobot may have been considered by some PSVR's mascot, but Firewall was PSVR's flagship shooter, and there was nothing else like it back in 2018. Going back, the hype of Firewall Ultra coming to PSVR2 was huge, and if you were a fan of the original, it seemed like an absolute no-brainer of a purchase. A reimagined Firewall making the jump from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5, and it was poised to set the bar as one of the best use cases for PSVR2's technology, with 4K HDR visuals, eye tracking support, adaptive triggers, headset haptics, dedicated servers, a PvE mode, new maps, improvements to the original maps, and new contractors. And for newcomers to the headset, this was about to be PlayStation VR2's official Rainbow Six VR game, and loved by everyone who will play it, just like the original was on PSVR. That was the plan anyway. As we got close to the release, there was some worrying signs. First Contact and Sony only allowed a limited number of press get early access and go hands-on, with 0 content creators allowed. Even those of us who had supported the original game on PSVR weren't invited, but they knew we existed. I'd even spoken to the CEO Hess Barber about the upcoming game, and it actually felt like this was done on purpose for reasons that were never explained. And to add to the oddness of all of this, going back and looking at these hands-on impressions, the press who attended weren't allowed to record their own gameplay. But in saying that, when you go through the feedback, it did seem pretty positive. There was a few mentions of spending too much time in lobbies, even though Firewall Ultra had 3 rounds instead of the original, which only had 1 round, which surely meant more game time and less time in lobbies. Eye tracking was mentioned as a big positive too, with only a few buggy moments. Most reported being able to pick your weapon simply by looking at what you wanted impressed them, even though it was an early build. So all in all, the first hands-on seemed pretty good, and the wow moments in terms of PSVR2 eye tracking didn't stop there. And it was clear First Contact were given an agenda by Sony to make the best use cases of this headset. Being able to reduce the effects of a flashbang if you close your eyes quick enough, which obviously still sounds very cool when you say it like that, was one of the many things players were looking forward to. They also improved one of my favourite things about Firewall, and that's being able to help your teammates when you're dead. And you can do this by flicking between security cameras around the levels and giving your team intel. But with PSVR2 eye tracking, you can highlight the enemy for all the team to see. And I think you'll agree, all of this sounds pretty epic, and the game isn't light on content either. And as I mentioned earlier, they brought us a new PvE mode. Now the reason I'm making this video today is because Sony dropped an update for Firewall Ultra only yesterday, which was surprising to say the least. And even though it only turned out to be a boost for the in-game currency and XP, meaning if you play right now, you'll get 4 times the amount of crypto and XP. It got me thinking, why now? An update like this will surely only benefit new players. So maybe Sony are about to add Firewall Ultra to PlayStation Plus for February. Or maybe there's been a sudden resurgence of interest in the game. Or maybe there's an impending huge sale. Either way, I wanted to see what the game was like to play in 2025. And in all honesty, it's actually potentially worse than I remember. But I also believe First Contact delivered some very cool use cases for eye tracking. And when I use them now, I can't help but be impressed, even if they are completely impractical to use in the game. The things I didn't like when it first launched in 2023, I still don't like today in 2025. I am a PCVR owner and a Quest owner, and play many different shooters. But even if you push this aside, PSVR2 already had Pavlov available in its library, and this made Firewall Ultra's job even harder. Pavlov has tons of weapons, freedom, high frame rates, realistic looking weapons, and dare I say it, manual reloading. You see, Firewall Ultra still has the original Firewall running underneath it, which means button press reloads in a game that's all about immersion and tactical realism in 2025, and that just doesn't make sense. And even though I've seen many counter arguments to the benefits of manual reloading, I would argue it's still quite unimmersive and sluggish. Watching your virtual hands do something your actual hands aren't doing is simply not a good idea, and because you have virtual hands mimicking your real hands, it just doesn't make sense to not manually reload your guns. This then moves us nicely to Firewall Ultra's decisions on throwing mechanics when it comes to grenades and flashbangs, and to do this you have to use your eyes. I can remember first hearing about this and thinking this sounds great, but what I didn't realise was it actually means you can't throw anything. It's a really bizarre choice, and it's like stepping back in time but with new technology. In one way, eye tracking is still a very underused tech in VR, but here's Firewall in 2023 letting you throw grenades and flashbangs using only your eyes. But unfortunately, as cool as it is, it's just simply not fun, and I still find it crazy to use today as I did then. The original Firewall was a game you could comfortably play using a DualShock. Most players preferred the aim control controller of course because of immersion and having joysticks. Plus it felt very cool to hold, and I would still argue it's one of the best VR peripherals ever made. With all that being said though, the game even has a bigger problem now. Right now the high percentage of players in Firewall are all highly experienced top level players, and when I speak to them it seems like they don't play much else, and when I went in it seemed to be the same 12 to 16 people on all night, and they killed everyone else in seconds. I met two new guys who soon left the lobby or quit the game, possibly looking for another lobby or an easier match to play with others, but they always ended up back in the hardcore lobby because these high levelers are the only people left in the game. In competitive terms, this leveling means nothing. It's more of a time served badge versus a skill level, and a level 1 player can play a level 50 player, which is obviously unfair, and unless the game does come to PS Plus, which would cause a huge insurgence of players, everyone who is new is simply getting mowed down very quickly, and ultimately it means the new players aren't having fun, or even the same experience as the high level players had when they first started the game. I'm not saying players aren't welcoming, because they are when you get to speak to them, but most lobbies I joined were in party chats, so you can't speak to anyone anyway. There was some stuff I did like however going back in. The graphics are actually far better than I remember, and they look lovely. The attention to detail pretty much everywhere is brilliant, and even though the game uses reprojection and the auto reload seem to run at a lower frame rate, which is a bit strange, I actually think the game looks great. Also, being able to hold the gun up to your face and then close one eye to activate zoom had me smiling every single time, and getting a kill in this game still feels awesome. When you play Firewall Ultra how it wants to be played, you can have a great time, and talking to a player who spends 500 to 2,000 hours just playing Firewall, playing any other VR game must feel completely alien, because Firewall is unique to every other VR shooter available. It's a hybrid, flat screen VR game to control. You can easily sit down and play it due to the eye tracking and the auto reloads. But ultimately, this game is a failure in Sony's eyes and saw the closure of First Contact Entertainment, which I personally felt was full of some very talented individuals, and some of them who worked on the game came from the community. And this makes it even more bizarre how Firewall Ultra ended up this way and alienating itself from every other VR first person shooter out there, apart from its own hardcore audience. I think if you can accept this game was made by people who thought what they were doing was something new and what the players wanted, and to those select hardcore players that are still in there, they got exactly what they wanted. And let's imagine that PSVR2 had sold 10 million headsets by the time Firewall Ultra had released versus the less than 2 million at the time, more players might be still enjoying it. It's a fun, futuristic, odd couch shooter, but for as many new ideas as Firewall Ultra brought to VR, it was those same ideas that eventually pushed the majority of players away.